Life has a funny way of changing when you least expect it. For 15 wonderful years, Richard Chen had everything anyone could dream of. His tech company, Global Tech Solutions, had grown from a small startup in his garage to a billion-dollar empire that shaped the future of artificial intelligence. His success story was the kind that inspired countless motivational speeches and business school case studies. But what made Richard truly feel blessed was his beautiful wife, Michelle. She wasn't just his life partner. She was the backbone of their success story. When they first met at a small coffee shop near their university, Richard was just a computer science student with big dreams and empty pockets. Michelle, then a brilliant medical student, saw something special in him. She believed in his vision when nobody else did. Their love story was the kind people write books about. Through the tough early years, Michelle worked extra hospital shifts to help fund Richard's startup. She was there through countless sleepless nights, bringing him coffee and sandwiches while he coded. When investors slammed doors in their faces, she was the one who wiped away his tears and told him to try one more time. And when success finally came, she remained the same humble, loving person who'd fallen in love with the dreamer, not his dreams. Their stunning house in the Pacific Heights neighborhood of San Francisco became a symbol of their journey together. Every morning, they would share breakfast on their terrace, overlooking the bay, planning their future. They talked about having children, about growing old together, about all the places they would visit once Richard could step back from the company. Michelle had even started looking into fertility treatments, hoping to start the family they'd been dreaming of. But fate had other plans. It started like any other Monday when Sophia walked into Global Tech's headquarters as the new marketing director. At 32, she was a rising star in the tech world, known for her innovative campaigns and ability to connect with younger audiences. Richard, now 45, found himself drawn to her energy and fresh perspective during meetings. At first, he told himself it was purely professional admiration. Sophia had brilliant ideas for rebranding Global Tech, making it more appealing to a younger generation. She could talk for hours about market trends and social media strategies, her eyes lighting up with the same passion Richard once had when discussing his own dreams. The late-night strategy sessions became more frequent. Richard found himself looking forward to their meetings, choosing to work late even when it wasn't necessary. He started missing those breakfast conversations with Michelle, making excuses about early morning conferences. When Michelle called during the day, he would let it go to voicemail, telling himself he was just too busy. Sophia made him feel young again. She laughed at his jokes, asked for his advice, and seemed to hang on his every word. Around her, he wasn't the middle-aged CEO worried about quarterly reports and board meetings. He was that young dreamer again, excited about the future and all its possibilities. The guilt came in waves. Every time Michelle smiled at him, every time she asked about his day or brought him his favorite home-cooked meals to the office, Richard felt like the worst person in the world. He knew he was playing with fire, but something kept pulling him back to Sophia. Everything came to a head during the company's annual charity gala. Michelle couldn't attend due to an important medical conference, and Richard found himself sharing a dance with Sophia. Under the soft lights, with the music playing and champagne flowing, something shifted. That night, Richard made a decision that would change multiple lives forever. The following weeks were a blur of emotional conversations and tears. Michelle couldn't understand what had gone wrong. She pointed to their years together, their shared dreams, their plans for a family. But Richard had convinced himself that he needed something different, something new. Their home, once filled with love and laughter, became eerily quiet. The breakfast terrace where they had shared so many dreams now stood empty. Photos that told the story of their 15 years together were packed away in boxes. The future they had planned so carefully was crumbling, all because of choices that seemed impossible to undo. As Richard watched Michelle pack her belongings, he felt a strange mix of guilt and relief. He told himself this was for the best, that everyone deserved a chance at happiness, even if it meant causing pain. What he didn't know was that this was just the beginning of a story that would take turns he never could have imagined. Michelle couldn't remember how long she'd been sitting in her car, staring at the fertility clinic's entrance. The morning fog typical of San Francisco had rolled in, wrapping the building in a gray haze that matched her mood perfectly. Just 2 weeks ago, she and Richard had sat in this very parking lot, holding hands and full of hope about their future family. Now she was here alone, clutching a white envelope containing news that would change everything. The divorce papers had arrived yesterday morning. Michelle had known they were coming, but seeing them laid out on her kitchen counter, their kitchen counter, made everything feel terribly real. Richard's lawyer had been efficient, almost cold in his handling of the situation. The papers came with a note explaining that Richard wanted to make this as painless as possible, offering a generous settlement that would ensure she never had to worry about money again. Money. Michelle almost laughed at the thought. What good was money when your entire world was falling apart? She never cared about Richard's wealth. Even now, as she sat in the luxury car he insisted she keep, she would have traded it all just to go back to those early days when they shared instant noodles in their tiny apartment, dreaming about their future together. The fertility treatments had been their shared dream for the past year. After trying naturally for so long, they'd decided to seek help. Michelle remembered how Richard had held her hand during every appointment, how he'd researched everything about IVF, making charts and schedules to track their progress. Their last attempt had been just before everything fell apart, before Sophia entered their lives and turned everything upside down. Taking a deep breath, Michelle finally opened the envelope. Her hands trembled as she read the results and then read them again, hardly daring to believe what she was seeing. Positive. The treatment had worked. She was pregnant. The irony of the timing wasn't lost on her. Here she was, finally achieving what they dreamed of for so long, just as Richard was walking away. Her first instinct was to call him. This was his child too, after all. She even reached for her phone before stopping herself. The image of Richard and Sophia at last week's company party, their photos splashed across social media, flashed through her mind. Back at home, the small apartment she'd rented after moving out of their house, Michelle sat surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, trying to make sense of her new reality. Her medical career, which she'd put on hold to support Richard's dreams, now seemed like a lifeline. She'd already received offers from several prestigious hospitals, including one in Geneva. The thought of starting fresh in a new country suddenly held a certain appeal. That evening, as she sorted through old photos and memories, Michelle made a decision that would alter not just her life, but the lives of everyone involved. She would leave San Francisco, leave the United States altogether. She would raise this child, their child, on her own. Richard had made his choice, and now she was making hers. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Michelle threw herself into planning her new life, scheduling interviews with European hospitals via video calls, researching neighborhoods in Geneva, and making arrangements to transfer her medical license. She ignored the constant stream of messages from well-meaning friends and family, all wanting to know how she was holding up, all offering advice she wasn't ready to hear. What she didn't expect was the call from her doctor a week later. The ultrasound had picked up something unusual, not one heartbeat, but multiple. Michelle sat in stunned silence as her doctor explained that the fertility treatment had been more successful than anyone could have anticipated. She wasn't just pregnant, she was carrying quadruplets. The news should have terrified her. 4 babies. 4 tiny lives depending entirely on her. Instead, Michelle felt an unexpected sense of peace wash over her. These babies were her miracle, her new family, her reason to keep going. She thought about telling Richard, her hand hovering over his number in her phone. But then she remembered the cold legal documents, the efficient way he'd dismantled their life together, the speed with which he'd moved on with Sophia. No, she decided. This was her journey now. She would build a new life for herself and her children, far from the shadows of Silicon Valley's glass towers and the memories that haunted every street corner of San Francisco. Her babies would know love, stability, and the strength that comes from overcoming life's greatest challenges. As Michelle packed the last of her belongings, she came across an old photo booth strip from their first date. Young Richard and Michelle smiled back at her, full of dreams and love and trust in each other. She tucked the photo into her wallet, not out of nostalgia, but as a reminder that she was stronger than she knew. After all, she had been the one who believed in Richard's dreams when no one else did. Now it was time to believe in her own. No, she decided. This was her journey now. She would build a new life for herself and her children, far from the shadows of Silicon Valley's glass towers and the memories that haunted every street corner of San Francisco. Her babies would know love, stability, and the strength that comes from overcoming life's greatest challenges. As Michelle packed the last of her belongings, she came across an old photo booth strip from their first date. Young Richard and Michelle smiled back at her, full of dreams and love and trust in each other. She tucked the photo into her wallet, not out of nostalgia, but as a reminder that she was stronger than she knew. After all, she had been the one who believed in Richard's dreams when no one else in Geneva welcomed Michelle with gray skies and gentle rain, as if the city understood her need for a quiet new beginning. Her small apartment overlooking Lake Geneva became her sanctuary, a place where she could finally breathe without memories of her past life haunting every corner. The lake's ever-changing colors reminded her of San Francisco Bay, but somehow this view felt different. It felt like hope. The first few months of pregnancy were challenging, especially with 4 babies. Her medical background helped her understand the risks and necessary precautions, but nothing could have prepared her for the emotional journey. Every morning, she would talk to her unborn children, telling them stories about their new home, promising them a life filled with love and adventure. Her colleagues at the Geneva International Hospital quickly became her support system. Dr. Pierre, a kind-hearted senior physician, took her under his wing, ensuring she had a flexible schedule that accommodated her high-risk pregnancy. The hospital staff, upon learning her story, minus the identity of the baby's father, rallied around her with a kind of warmth that made her feel less alone in a foreign country. As her belly grew, Michelle threw herself into preparing for her baby's arrival. The spare room in her apartment transformed into a nursery, with 4 small cribs arranged in a circle. She would often sit in the rocking chair by the window, imagining what her children would look like, hoping they would have her resilience and their father's determination, the good parts of him, the parts she had fallen in love with all those years ago. The birth came earlier than expected, as is common with multiple pregnancies. On a snowy December morning, Michelle welcomed her quadruplets into the world, 3 boys and a girl. As she held each tiny bundle for the first time, she was struck by how much they resembled Richard. They all had his distinctive eyes, a unique shade of gray-blue that seemed to change color in different lights. She named the boys Anthony, Benjamin, and Charlie, and the girl Diana. Each name was chosen carefully, representing strength and independence. Looking at their perfect little faces, Michelle felt no regret about her decision to keep them a secret from their father. These precious babies were her miracle, her new beginning. The first year was a blur of sleepless nights, endless diaper changes, and more love than Michelle had ever thought possible. She developed a system, treating the chaos of raising quadruplets like one of her medical procedures, organized, efficient, but filled with warmth and care. Her neighbors, an elderly Swiss couple, often helped with babysitting, treating the quadruplets as their own grandchildren. Michelle's career flourished alongside her growing family. She specialized in fertility treatment, helping other women achieve their dreams of motherhood. Her personal experience with quadruplets made her especially empathetic to patients going through difficult pregnancies. The hospital promoted her to head of the fertility department, recognizing not just her medical expertise, but her compassionate approach to patient care. As the children grew, their personalities began to emerge. Anthony was the natural leader, always looking out for his siblings. Benjamin was the quiet observer, taking in everything around him with thoughtful eyes. Charlie was the adventurous one, constantly exploring and pushing boundaries. And Diana, the youngest by mere minutes, was a perfect blend of all 3, with an extra dash of determination that reminded Michelle so much of herself. Sometimes, when she watched them play in the park near their home, Michelle would catch glimpses of Richard in their mannerisms. The way Anthony would furrow his brow when concentrating, how Benjamin would tilt his head when curious, Charlie's infectious laugh, and Diana's determined problem-solving approach. These moments would make her heart ache, but they also reinforced her belief that she had made the right choice. By the time the quadruplets turned 3, they had developed their own special language, as multiples often do. They would chatter away in a mix of English, French, and their own unique words, creating a world that was entirely their own. Michelle made sure they grew up bilingual, wanting them to feel at home in both their American heritage and their Swiss present. Life fell into a comfortable routine. Mornings were a whirlwind of getting 4 toddlers dressed and fed before heading to their daycare near the hospital. Evenings were filled with stories, bath-time adventures, and quiet moments when Michelle would hold all four of them close, marveling at how complete they made her feel. She kept track of Richard's life through occasional news articles about global tech. She learned that his relationship with Sofia had ended after 2 years, something that didn't surprise her, but also didn't bring the satisfaction she might have expected. Instead, she felt a strange sort of peace, knowing that while his life had taken its turns, she had built something beautiful and meaningful from what could have been just a sad ending. As the children's 5th birthday approached, Michelle began planning a small celebration at their favorite park. She had no way of knowing that fate was about to step in, bringing their carefully constructed world into collision with the past she had left behind. Now it was time to believe in her own. Richard stepped out of his hotel in Geneva, trying to shake off the lingering effects of jet lag. The tech conference that brought him here was still 2 days away, but he'd arrived early, hoping the change of scenery might help clear his head. The past 5 years had left him feeling increasingly hollow, despite his continuing success in the business world. Global tech had grown even bigger under his leadership, expanding into artificial intelligence and renewable energy. The company's value had tripled, making him one of the wealthiest tech entrepreneurs in the world. But success had a funny way of highlighting what was missing in life. His relationship with Sofia had crumbled after 2 years, ending not with dramatic fights, but with a quiet realization that they wanted different things. She had moved on to lead marketing for a startup in Austin, while he threw himself deeper into his work, trying to fill the emptiness that seemed to grow larger each year. The morning was unusually warm for spring in Geneva, and Richard decided to skip his usual car service and walk instead. His Swiss colleague had mentioned a beautiful park near the lake, perfect for clearing one's thoughts. As he walked, his mind drifted back to Michelle, as it often did during quiet moments. He tried to find her after their divorce, not to reconcile, but just to know she was okay. But she had disappeared completely, leaving no trace behind. The park was exactly as described. A peaceful haven with ancient trees and winding paths. Children's laughter drifted from a playground nearby, drawing him toward the sound. Richard had always loved watching kids play. It reminded him of simpler times, of dreams he once shared with Michelle about having a family of their own. He found a bench near the playground and sat down, pulling out his phone to check some emails. But something kept drawing his attention away from the screen. There was a group of children playing an elaborate game of tag, 4 of them moving with the kind of coordination that spoke of deep familiarity with each other. At first he watched them absently, his mind still half on work. Then one of the boys laughed, a sound so familiar it made Richard's heart skip a beat. He looked up properly, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. 3 boys and a girl, all around 5 years old, all moving with identical grace. But it was their faces that made his breath catch in his throat. He saw his own eyes staring back at him, not just once but 4 times over. The same gray-blue shade that he'd inherited from his grandmother, the same shape that he saw every morning in the mirror. The girl had his dimples, the ones that only appeared when he smiled. One of the boys furrowed his brow in concentration exactly the way Richard did when solving a complex problem. Another had his characteristic head tilt, while the third displayed the same determined set of his jaw that Richard recognized from his own childhood photos. Time seemed to slow down as his brain struggled to process what he was seeing. The children were clearly siblings, quadruplets, and they clearly shared his DNA. The mathematical part of his mind started calculating dates, and his heart began to race as everything fell into place. 5 years. They were 5 years old. Michelle had disappeared 5 years ago, right after their divorce. The fertility treatments they'd been trying before everything fell apart. His hands began to shake as the full impact of what he was seeing hit him. One of the boys spotted him staring and whispered something to his siblings. All 4 children turned to look at him with identical curious expressions. Richard felt rooted to the spot, unable to move or even breathe properly. They were beautiful, perfect, and completely unknown to him. Children he should have known from their first breath, children he should have watched grow, children who were undeniably his. A familiar voice called out from across the playground, and Richard's world shifted again. Anthony, Benjamin, Charlie, Diana, time for lunch. The The children turned away from him, running toward the voice he hadn't heard in 5 years but would know anywhere. Michelle appeared at the edge of the playground, a picnic basket in one hand. She was even more beautiful than he remembered, her dark hair shorter now, her face more mature but somehow more serene. She was smiling at the children, their children, with such love that it made his chest ache. Then she looked up and saw him. Their eyes met across the playground, and 5 years of separation collapsed into a single moment. Richard watched as all color drained from her face, saw her instinctively gather the children closer to her, like a mother hen protecting her chicks. The quadruplets looked between their mother and this stranger who looked so much like them, their young minds trying to piece together a puzzle they didn't yet understand. Diana, the girl, tugged at Michelle's sleeve and asked something in French, but Richard couldn't hear the words over the roaring in his ears. He stood up slowly, afraid that any sudden movement might cause them all to disappear like a mirage. Michelle remained frozen in place, her arms around their children, her eyes never leaving his face. 1,000 questions fought for space in his mind, but only one made it to his lips. Why? The word hung in the air between them, heavy with 5 years of lost time, missed first steps, unheard first words, and birthdays he hadn't known to celebrate. The answer, he realized, was written in every protective gesture Michelle made toward their children, in every wary glance she cast his way. Time seemed to stand still in that playground, with only the gentle splash of the lake's waves breaking the tense silence. The 4 children, sensing the gravity of the moment, huddled closer to Michelle, their small hands clutching at her dress. Their eyes darted between their mother and this stranger who looked so remarkably like them, their young minds trying to make sense of the situation. "Maman?" Diana whispered in French, tugging at Michelle's sleeve. "Who is that man?" Her question hung in the air, heavy with implications that none of the children yet understood. Michelle took a deep breath, her protective instincts warring with the reality of the situation before her. Richard stood rooted to his spot, his legs seemingly unable to move. His eyes couldn't stop shrinking in the sight of his children, their children. Anthony, the tallest of the boys, stood slightly in front of his siblings, already showing signs of being their protector. Benjamin clutched his favorite book to his chest, a habit Michelle had mentioned he displayed when nervous. Charlie, usually the most adventurous, had gone unusually quiet, while Diana's bright eyes studied Richard with an intensity that mirrored his own. Perhaps Michelle finally spoke, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "We should talk somewhere more private." She gestured toward a small cafe at the edge of the park, one she knew well from countless family outings. The children's faces lit up at the sight of the familiar place. "The cafe with the chocolate croissants?" Charlie asked hopefully, the tension momentarily forgotten in the way only children can manage. Michelle nodded, grateful for the break in the heavy atmosphere. As they walked toward the cafe, Richard hung back slightly, watching as Michelle expertly managed 4 excited 5-year-olds. She spoke to them in a mix of English and French, answering their questions with patience and warmth. It was clear that she was an amazing mother, and the realization made his heart ache for all the moments he'd missed. The cafe owner, a cheerful woman named Marie, greeted them warmly. "Ah, mes petites," she exclaimed, already reaching for the children's favorite treats. She gave Richard a curious look, but noting Michelle's expression, asked no questions. They settled at a large corner table, the children happily occupied with their croissants and hot chocolate. Michelle had positioned herself between them and Richard, still maintaining her protective stance. The silence between the adults grew thick with unspoken words and 5 years of separation. "They're beautiful," Richard finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "There," he trailed off, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was singing. "Perfect," Michelle finished for him, her eyes softening slightly as she watched their children. "They are perfect." Anthony, always observant, looked between his mother and Richard. "You look like us," he said matter-of-factly, crumbs of chocolate croissant dotting his chin. "Especially your eyes." "They're like ours." Richard felt tears threatening to fall. "Yes," he answered softly, "I suppose they are." Benjamin, who had been quietly studying Richard over his book, suddenly asked, "Are you our father?" The question silenced everyone at the table. Even Charlie stopped mid-bite of his croissant. Michelle closed her eyes briefly, then opened them to look directly at her children. "Yes," she said simply. "This is your father." The reactions were as varied as their personalities. Anthony's face showed a mix of protection and curiosity. Benjamin nodded as if confirming a theory he'd long held. Charlie's eyes widened with excitement and questions. Diana simply stared at Richard, her young face serious and thoughtful. "But why haven't we met you before?" Charlie burst out, unable to contain his curiosity any longer. "Where have you been?" The pain in Richard's eyes was visible as he struggled to find an appropriate answer for 5-year-olds. Michelle intercepted, years of handling difficult questions coming to her aid. "Sometimes grown-ups make complicated decisions," she explained gently. "But what's important is that we're all here now." Diana, who had been quietly processing everything, suddenly stood up and walked around the table to Richard. She studied his face up close, reaching out to touch his cheek with small, gentle fingers. "Your smile makes little holes like mine," she observed, pointing to her own dimples. Richard felt his heart might burst. "Yes," he managed, "those are called dimples. They're special little smiles that some people have." The ice broken by Diana's innocent observation, the other children began asking questions rapid fire. What did he do for work? Did he like chocolate croissants too? Could he speak French? Did he know how to play soccer? Richard answered each question carefully, acutely aware of Michelle's watchful gaze. As the children chattered, Michelle observed the man she had once loved, still loved, in a way, through their children. She saw how he fought to keep his composure, how his hands trembled slightly as he accepted a piece of croissant offered by Charlie, how his eyes filled with tears every time one of the children smiled or laughed. The afternoon sun was starting to cast long shadows through the cafe windows when Michelle finally checked her watch. "It's almost time for your piano lessons," she reminded the children, prompting a chorus of protests. "Can't we stay longer?" Benjamin asked, looking hopefully between his parents. "We just met Papa." The word Papa hung in the air, making both adults catch their breath. Richard looked at Michelle, a silent plea in his eyes. She nodded slightly, understanding that this moment couldn't simply end here. "How about this?" she suggested, her voice gentle but firm. "You go to your piano lessons with Mrs. Laurent, and your father and I need to have a grown-up talk. We have a lot to discuss." The children reluctantly agreed, each giving Richard a slightly awkward but heartfelt goodbye. Diana hugged him spontaneously, and he had to fight back tears again as he felt her tiny arms around his neck. As Michelle arranged for Mary to watch the children until their piano teacher arrived, Richard sat in stunned silence, trying to process how his life had changed so completely in the span of an afternoon. When Michelle returned to the table, her face was composed, but her eyes showed a storm of emotions. "I suppose," she said quietly, "we have a lot to talk about." After the children left for their piano lessons, the cozy cafe felt strangely empty. Richard and Michelle sat across from each other, 5 years of unspoken words hanging between them like a heavy curtain. Through the window, they could see Marie entertaining the children while they waited for their piano teacher, their laughter a stark contrast to the tension at the table. "How long are you in Geneva?" Michelle finally asked, her fingers wrapped tightly around her coffee cup. "A week. There's a medical technology conference," Richard replied, then added softly, "though I suppose everything's different now." Michelle nodded, taking a slow sip of her coffee. "I found out 2 weeks after you asked for the divorce," she said quietly. "The last round of fertility treatment had worked, more successfully than anyone expected." Richard closed his eyes, the weight of what he'd missed crushing down on him. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice cracked slightly. "They're my children too, Michelle." "Are they?" Michelle's voice was calm but carried an edge of old pain. "You walked away from our marriage, from our dreams of having a family, for a younger woman. You were so quick to start your new life with Sophia. What was I supposed to think?" The mention of Sophia made Richard wince. "That relationship ended years ago," he said. "It was a mistake, the biggest mistake of my life." "I know," Michelle replied. "I saw the news about your breakup. But by then, the children were 2 years old. They had their routines, their lives here. I was worried that," she trailed off. "That I'd hurt them like I hurt you," Richard finished for her. The truth of it hung heavy in the air. Michelle straightened in her chair. "I need you to understand something. Every decision I made was to protect them. They're happy, healthy, and loved. They're thriving here." They're amazing, Richard agreed, his voice full of wonder and regret. Anthony's protective nature, Benjamin's thoughtfulness, Charlie's energy, Diana's spirit. They're perfect, and I've missed everything. Their birth, first steps, first words. Anthony's first word was book, Michelle found herself saying. Benjamin's was why. Charlie said go, very fitting for him. Diana said love. She pulled out her phone, hesitated for a moment, then passed it to Richard. Here. Richard's hands shook as he scrolled through photos of his children's early years. The twins in matching onesies. Their first birthday, faces covered in cake. First steps, wobbly and determined. Christmas mornings, beach days, playground adventures. Each photo was a moment he should have been part of, a piece of their lives he had missed. They asked about you, Michelle admitted. As they got older, they noticed other kids had dads. I told them their father lived far away. I never said anything bad about you. I couldn't, they have so much of you in them. Tears fell freely down Richard's cheeks now. I don't deserve your kindness, he whispered. I destroyed our family before they were even born. You did, Michelle agreed, but her voice was gentle. But that's the past. We need to think about their future now. They've met you. They called you Papa. We can't pretend this didn't happen. Richard wiped his eyes. What do you want to do? He asked. I know I have no right to make demands, but I want to be part of their lives. I'll do whatever you think is best for them. Michelle was quiet for a long moment, watching their children through the window. They need stability, she said finally. They're at a crucial age. Any changes have to be gradual, consistent. I won't have them hurt or disappointed. I understand, Richard nodded. I could move some of Quadruplets' operations to Europe. We've been planning to expand here anyway. I could get a place nearby, see them as often as you're comfortable with, get to know them slowly on their terms. You do that? Michelle asked, surprised. Leave everything in San Francisco. Michelle, Richard's voice was firm. I left everything that truly mattered 5 years ago. I won't make that mistake again. These children, our children, they're more important than any company or business deal. Michelle studied his face, seeing the sincerity there. We'll need boundaries, she said. Clear ones. And you'll need to be patient. They may have accepted you quickly today, but building real relationships takes time. I have a lifetime of love to give them, Richard replied, and a lifetime of mistakes to make up for. I'll take whatever time you'll give me. Just then, Mrs. Laurent, the piano teacher, arrived at the cafe. Through the window, they watched as their children gathered their things, each giving Marie a hug goodbye. Before leaving, all four turned to wave at their parents, their faces bright with the innocent hope that only children can have. They have piano lessons every Tuesday and Thursday, Michelle said softly, and they play soccer in the park on Saturday mornings. If you're serious about this. I am, Richard interrupted, more serious than I've ever been about anything. Michelle nodded slowly. Then maybe you could start there, small steps, getting to know them, letting them know you. As they watched their children leave with Mrs. Laurent, both parents felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about their past mistakes or present circumstances. It was about 4 innocent lives who deserved all the love and stability their parents could give them. Thank you, Richard said quietly. Not for me. I don't deserve thanks, but thank you for raising them so beautifully, for giving them so much love, for being the parent I should have been there to be. Michelle's eyes softened. They make it easy to love them, she said. They always have. Just don't let them down, Richard. I couldn't bear to see them hurt. Never again, he promised, and this time they both knew he meant it. 6 months had passed since that fateful day in the park. The leaves had turned from spring green to autumn gold, and Geneva's streets were covered in a carpet of crisp leaves that crunched underfoot. Richard stood at the sidelines of the soccer field, watching Charlie dribble the ball with impressive skill for a 5-year-old. Go, Charlie! Anthony shouted from beside him, jumping up and down with excitement. Benjamin sat cross-legged on a blanket nearby, alternating between reading his book and watching his brother play. Diana was practicing cartwheels in the grass, her dark hair flying wild with each turn. Richard had kept his promise. Within a month of discovering his children, he had opened Quadruplets' European headquarters in Geneva. His apartment, a warm and welcoming space with a room for each child, was just 10 minutes from Michelle's home. The transition hadn't been easy, but watching his children grow and learn made every challenge worthwhile. He'd started small, just as Michelle had suggested. Tuesday and Thursday piano lessons became their routine. He would sit in the waiting room, listening to their practice, then treat them to hot chocolate afterward. Saturdays were for soccer games and park adventures. Slowly, surely, he was becoming part of their world. The children had adapted to the change in their own unique ways. Anthony had been cautiously protective at first, always watching Richard's interactions with his siblings. But the day Richard helped him build a complex Lego structure, spending hours getting every detail right, something shifted. Now, Anthony often sought him out for projects, proud to show his father his latest achievements. Benjamin, the quiet observer, took longer to warm up. It was their shared love of books that finally bridged the gap. Richard would spend hours reading with him, answering his endless questions about everything from dinosaurs to space. One day, Benjamin had simply climbed into his lap with a new book and said, "This one's harder, Papa. Can you help me?" Charlie, true to his nature, had dived headfirst into having a father. He wanted to show Richard everything, tell him everything, learn everything from him. His energy was infectious, and Richard found himself rediscovering the joy of simple things through Charlie's excited eyes. Diana had been the surprise. She'd inherited not just Richard's dimples, but his analytical mind. She would study him sometimes, her young face serious, then ask questions that showed remarkable insight. "Were you sad when you didn't know us?" she'd asked one day. "Because we were sad when we didn't know you, even though we didn't know we were sad." Michelle watched these developments with cautious optimism. She saw how Richard never missed a promised visit, how he rearranged global business meetings to attend school performances, how he learned to braid Diana's hair by watching YouTube tutorials. The man who had once chosen career and excitement over family had transformed into a father who found his greatest joy in Saturday morning cartoons with his children. The relationship between Richard and Michelle had evolved too. The bitter pain of the past gradually gave way to a different kind of partnership, one built on their shared love for their children. They learned to coordinate schedules, make decisions together, and even laugh about the chaos that came with raising quadruplets. Today was special, the children's 6th birthday party. They had decided to hold it in the park where everything had changed 6 months ago. Richard arrived early to help set up, carrying boxes of decorations and a massive cake with 6 candles. "Need help with that?" Michelle's voice came from behind him. She looked beautiful in a simple blue dress, a smile warm and genuine. "Always," Richard replied, handing her the streamers. As they worked together to decorate the picnic area, he couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed. The party was everything a 6th birthday should be, full of laughter, games, and sugar-fueled excitement. The children's friends from school mixed with their new friends from the neighborhood, creating a joyful chaos. Marie from the cafe had provided a mountain of chocolate croissants, and Mrs. Laurent led the children in a musical performance they'd been practicing for weeks. "Make a wish." Everyone shouted as the quadruplets gathered around their cake. 4 heads bent together, 4 pairs of gray-blue eyes closed in concentration, and 4 wishes were made with innocent hope. Later, as the party wound down and the sun began to set, Richard found Michelle sitting on their usual bench, watching the children play with their new toys. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For giving me a second chance, for letting me be their father, for raising them to be such amazing little people." Michelle smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "They're amazing, aren't they?" Anthony's leadership, Benjamin's curiosity, Charlie's joy, Diana's wisdom, they're the best of both of us. Richard nodded, watching as Diana showed her brothers a new dance move she'd learned. "I keep thinking about what I almost lost," he admitted. "What I did lose, 5 years of their lives." "You can't change the past," Michelle said gently. "But you're here now, and you're the father they deserve. That's what matters." As if on cue, all 4 children ran over, faces flushed with excitement. "Papa, Maman," Charlie called out. "Can we show you our new soccer trick?" Richard and Michelle exchanged a glance, both remembering a time when such a simple question would have been impossible. Now it was their new normal, birthday parties and soccer games, homework help and bedtime stories, two parents working together to give their children the best of both worlds. Of course, they answered in unison, following their children onto the field. The sun was setting over Lake Geneva, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. As Richard watched his family, because that's what they were now, a family, he realized that sometimes the biggest mistakes can lead to the most beautiful second chances. His billions, his company's success, none of it compared to the wealth he'd found in the laughter of his children and the forgiveness of their mother. They weren't a conventional family, but they were Make-A-Wish. Everyone shouted as the quadruplets gathered around their cake. 4 heads bent together, 4 pairs of gray-blue eyes closed in concentration, and 4 wishes were made with innocent hope. Later, as the party wound down and the sun began to set, Richard found Michelle sitting on their usual bench, watching the children play with their new toys. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For giving me a second chance, for letting me be their father, for raising them to be such amazing little people." Michelle smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "They are amazing, aren't they? Anthony's leadership, Benjamin's curiosity, Charlie's joy, Diana's wisdom, they're the best of both of us." Richard nodded, watching as Diana showed her brothers a new dance move she'd learned. "I keep thinking about what I almost lost," he admitted. "What I did lose, 5 years of their lives." "You can't change the past," Michelle said gently. "But you're here now, and you're the father they deserve. That's what matters." As if on cue, all 4 children ran over, faces flushed with excitement. "Papa, Maman," Charlie called out. "Can we show you our new soccer trick?" Richard and Michelle exchanged a glance, both remembering a time when such a simple question would have been impossible. Now it was their new normal, birthday parties and soccer games, homework help and bedtime stories, 2 parents working together to give their children the best of both worlds. Of course, they answered in unison, following their children onto the field. The sun was setting over Lake Geneva, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. As Richard watched his family, because that's what they were now, a family, he realized that sometimes the biggest mistakes can lead to the most beautiful second chances. His billions, his company's success, none of it compared to the wealth he'd found in the laughter of his children and the forgiveness of their mother. They weren't a conventional family, but they were perfect in their own way. And as he joined his children on the field, Richard knew that these moments, these laughs, these precious seconds of being a father, this was what real success looked like, perfect in their own way. And as he joined his children on the field, Richard knew that these moments, these laughs, these precious seconds of being a father, this was what real success looked like.